You won't believe what happened next. The king of late night, the cool, unflappable host who tucked America into bed for 3 decades, kept a private list he almost never talked about. Not funniest guests, not biggest ratings draws. A secret roll call of people he thought were, in his words to close friends, bad news. He was the perfect gentleman on camera, quick with a smile and a zinger. But once the applause died and the lights cooled, he'd lean toward the bandleader, lower his voice, and mutter something like, "That one? Never again." What was on that list didn't come from gossip columns or bruised egos. It came from what he saw close up. How stars treated the people who couldn't fight back. Tonight, we're opening the door that stayed shut for years and walking right into the stories that left him shaken, furious, or simply done. Joan Crawford. On TV, she was poise incarnate, chin high, posture like a ruler, voice soft as velvet. In the studio, according to multiple staffers, that velvet could turn to ice. The day she was booked, the team received a lighting memo so detailed it read like a blueprint. Angles, shadows, chair height, desk distance, even the thermostat. Exactly 67 degrees. Not 66, not 68. When she finally arrived, early and flanked by her own glam squad despite an award-winning makeup team on staff, it wasn't the extra powder that stuck with people. It was the way she graded humans by status. She was sweetness itself to the host. Everyone else? Disposable. A young production assistant, barely 20 and trying to do everything right, knocked too soon with water. The explosion, as several witnesses remembered it, was blistering. The kid fled in tears. When Crawford demanded she be fired, the producer said no. The tension hung over the rest of the day like storm clouds. What pushed the host over the edge wasn't just cruelty, it was calculation. The moment that red light blinked on, she turned alive like flipping a switch. Laughs charm those practiced anecdotes. During breaks, the mask dropped, stone face, silence, no small talk. Afterward, he reportedly joked to his sidekick that he'd interviewed livelier corpses. Years later, when a memoir painted a brutal picture of her private life, he wasn't shocked. He'd seen enough in a few hours to believe it. Not because he wanted to, because it fit the person who'd appeared when the cameras were off, Frank Sinatra. On screen, they looked friendly, 2 towering pros trading quips and respect. Off-screen, the host never got past the feeling that the singer's charm was a suit he could take on and off at will. The entourage alone set the tone. Not assistants so much as sentinels, posted along corridors like a silent warning. During one taping, a floor manager gave the polite 3-minute cue. The singer yanked him by the tie and hissed that nobody tells him when he's ready. That manager had seen combat. He still came away rattled. Watching from an office monitor, the host nearly pulled the plug. Only a producer whispering about ratings kept the segment alive. Reliability also became a sore spot. The singer would breeze in, then bail for reasons that felt more like moods than emergencies. But the moment that stuck wasn't about schedules. It was a casually cruel remark about a staffer's looks during a commercial break. Loud, cutting, meant to land. The host stared him down and said, cold as steel, "We don't talk about my people that way." When the show resumed, both men wore their public faces. The questions got shorter. The warmth vanished. From that day on, the singer's bookings dropped. The host rarely meddled in scheduling. This time, he did. Orson Welles. Genius? Absolutely. The problem, as the host saw it, was that the genius came with a gravitational field that bent every rule of television around itself. Staff would prep questions. Wells would strike them out like a schoolteacher grading a failing essay. Pedestrian, he'd say. Obvious. Then he'd sit down and treat the night like an open-ended monologue. Signals to wrap. Ignored. 7 minutes could balloon to 25. 2 guests left cooling their heels backstage. Regrettable, yes, but not his concern. Once, he even tried to direct the show from the sofa, waving at cameras and giving angles as if he'd never left the director's chair. The host, a stickler for timing and flow, hated it. Admiration for the art didn't mean free passes for disrespecting the craft. Being brilliant doesn't buy you the right to hijack someone else's show, he grumbled afterward. He meant it, Bette Davis. Nobody outacted Bette Davis. Nobody outneedled her either. In front of the audience, she sparkled with tart wit and old Hollywood stories that could stop the room. Between moments, though, she could be prosecutorial. If another guest drew laughs, she'd lean forward, cut in, regain the ground like a courtroom tiger. Staff quietly prepared for turbulence when her name appeared on the call sheet. The pre-show request for whiskey wasn't the issue. Plenty of legends liked to sip. It was how the edges sharpened after. More than once, staff recalled barbs that felt over the line. Sexist, racist, mean. During a rehearsal, she ripped into a cue card holder for moving too slow. The host stepped in, not loud, just firm. On this show, we treat everyone with respect. Or we don't speak. She backed off, surprised. He still admired her work. He just didn't need to feel cross-examined every time she sat down. Eventually, he decided he'd had enough of the verbal lashings. Mickey Rooney. Hollywood's once unstoppable dynamo had a motor that revved even harder with age, sometimes with a little help from the bottle. On a good night, he was a firecracker. On a bad one, staff dreaded being assigned to his orbit. Women, on the team in particular, learned to plan around him if they could. They told versions of the same story. You bring water, he grabs your hand, and holds on just long enough to make escape awkward. The questions get too personal. The jokes turn suggestive. Boundaries blur. During at least a few appearances, he seemed beyond tipsy. Words slurring, stories drifting into places you couldn't air at 11:30 without a panic button. Once, he launched a Judy Garland anecdote that veered south so fast the host had to cut and change topics mid-sentence. Is he drunk? The host asked during a break. Or is this just who he is now? Either way, the fix was the same. Fewer bookings, more daytime pre-tapes, and tighter supervision. The show loved nostalgia. It didn't love apologies. Zsa Zsa Gabor. She was a one-woman spectacle. Diamonds, accent, a wink you could hear across the studio. And, oh, the list. Flowers in the dressing room. Orchids, nothing else. The thermostat, but in her case warmer. Water brand, number of ice cubes, precise lighting, and her own specialist flown in at production expense if possible. No younger starlets booked the same night. The first time the staff received her requirements, they laughed, thinking someone was pranking them. They weren't. If a single item was off, she'd lock the dressing room door and refuse to budge. Once, she discovered the makeup room was missing her favorite foundation and demanded a runner dash to Beverly Hills. Minutes ticked. Schedules collapsed. The host finally called her himself to smooth things over. He could turn on the charm when it saved an entire crew from overtime. But after one too many delays followed by on-air complaints about her introduction, he cracked a deadpan joke to the team. Next time, let's just rename the show after her, and I'll be the guest. She kept getting invited because when she finally sat down, she delivered. But the production team never forgot the cost. Shelley Winters. Put a mic in front of her and you weren't just getting a guest, you were getting a weather system. She didn't chat, she landed. She cared deeply about politics and social issues, and that passion came roaring out whether or not the night's vibe called for it. A light question about a new movie could turn into a 5-minute indictment of government policy. The host was the best traffic cop in the business, but with Winters even he sometimes had to wait out the storm and find a safe exit ramp. Her volatility wasn't just verbal. She had a famous on-air confrontation overseas where a glass of whiskey went flying into a fellow guest's face after a sexist remark. That clip made the rounds, and the Tonight team quietly developed a pre-Shelley checklist: remove anything throwable from the set. The host respected that she meant every word. She wasn't faking it. Respect didn't change the fact that her appearances turned a carefully planned show into a daredevil act. Jane Russell. Icon, bombshell, star. She brought the glamour of the 40s and 50s right to the sofa. But it wasn't brazen outfits or spicy stories that turned the host off. It was the way, according to staff who heard it firsthand, her private remarks targeted the people least able to push back. He was a tab closer on politics during the show. His job was to keep the night fun for everyone. Off camera, he didn't mind differences of opinion. He did mind when opinions became personal. Crew members recalled her rejecting a gay makeup artist and insisting on a replacement. Worse, she reportedly balked at sharing a lineup with a closeted leading man, derogatory asides included. The host had friends and staff across the LGBTQ+ community and wasn't about to tolerate quiet discrimination in his house. After a final appearance punctuated by dismissive commentary about civil rights during a break, she simply wasn't back. He rarely banned anyone outright. He didn't have to. He just stopped calling. Jerry Lewis, a titan of comedy, a director, a philanthropist whose telethon made him America's annual ringmaster of generosity. The contradiction that ate at the host was razor sharp. The man who cried on air for kids could, behind the curtain, tear into adults with a casual meanness that left people shaking. On stage, Lewis hijacked conversations, steamrolled other guests, and once reached across and fiddled with the host's tie like it was a prop. That was more than a boundary breach. Everyone knew the host didn't like to be touched unless he offered first. Crew members fared worse. Lewis wouldn't learn names. Camera guy. Makeup girl. Once, a camera operator coughed during rehearsal, just a quiet human cough. Lewis stopped the room and unleashed a rant about amateurs breathing loud on his time, then demanded the man be removed. He had allergies. The host saw all of it, logged it, and quietly moved on. After one last exhausting appearance, the verdict was simple: never again. Years later, when someone brought up Lewis at dinner, the host's answer stunned the table for its bluntness. He almost never talked that way about anyone. This time, he did. Here's what ties this list together, and why it mattered so much to him. It wasn't about talent. All of these people were giants in their fields. It wasn't about nerves. He could spot those a mile away and soften the ground for anxious guests. It wasn't even about ego. He'd built a career navigating egos, nudging them into laughter and, if necessary, trimming them with a well-placed punchline. It was about character. His North Star was simple. How do you treat the people who can't help you? The pages guiding you to your mark. The assistants refilling your glass. The camera ops staying late so your segment looks perfect. When he saw cruelty, he remembered it. When he saw entitlement that crushed everyone else's work, he acted, quietly, professionally, but decisively. If you're wondering whether time proved him right, consider what later bubbled into the public eye. Tell-all books, biographies, long-ignored stories surfacing in print and on camera. Reports of mob connections, accounts of explosive tempers, uncomfortable tales of harassment. All the stuff the old studio system kept under wraps for decades. Back then, there were no phones buzzing in pockets with record buttons ready. A scream in a dressing room stayed in a dressing room. A threat in a hallway vanished if the right publicist made the right call. The host lived through that era, the last gasp of the steel-plated image machine, and he never forgot how different some people were when the audience wasn't looking. At the same time, he could separate the difficult from the dangerous. Unreliable? He could schedule around it. Overly rehearsed? He'd find the crack in the armor and sneak a laugh through. Intense beliefs? He could gently pivot and keep it light, but treat his crew like furniture? Humiliate a young staffer to feel powerful? Try to dominate the production like you owned it? That, in his view, crossed the line from personality to poison, and when it crossed, the invitation list changed. Now, why share this at all? Because the story isn't really about gossip. It's about a simple test for power that still holds. The truest version of someone shows up when there's nothing in it for them. For 3 decades, America's night owl sat 6 feet from the biggest stars on Earth and watched those versions emerge. He measured them not by applause, but by quiet moments none of us saw. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he cared fiercely about the people who made the show happen. That loyalty shaped his private blacklist more than ratings ever could.